so everyone else gets a chance. So, so clearly, with the airline alliance, whatever, all of you, it's a case that you're arguing that the self-assessment shouldn't be available.
No,
is that what you're arguing?
No, that's not correct, Senator. What we're arguing is we're arguing for universal, fair and equitable access. Now, what we're saying in that, and I'd just like to reference a letter I received back from CASA on the 11th of October, and that is, for nearly a year and a half, the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association had sent a multitude of letters to CASA to qualify a question, and the question was it safe for a pilot to fly an aircraft outside controlled airspace with one passenger and to do so on a self-assessment medical? Now, we knew it was safe because CASA had permitted the RAAus, for example, to do exactly this. They clearly had made a determination as the safety regulator that it was in fact safe, and therefore this organisation was approved to do it. Now, the question has always been, why is one organisation approved and yet the CASA-regulated pilot fraternity denied? And so I actually got a reply on the 11th of October, and it was actually strange that I got the reply on the 11th of October because it came exactly 24 hours after, Senator Sterle, you were quoted in the media as saying that you were seeking an inquiry into the dual standards in medicals.
So it's my fault for not doing it earlier.
It's miraculous, Senator. But the question I put forward to CASA was, quote, is it safe for an Australian private pilot to fly an Australian registered aircraft with an MTOW of 600 kilograms in Australian airspace on a self-certification private driver's licence medical, meaning outside controlled airspace? The response I got from CASA a year and a half virtually after we started this process was, quote, the answer is yes. Now, if the answer is yes, Senators, and the role of our regulator is to set aviation safety standards based on risk, and for those standards to be promulgated into regulation, why is our safety regulator denying our pilot community the choice to fly in that category? Now, we are not asking, our organisations are not asking at this point in time to be granted the access to fly on an RPL licence and a PPL licence inside of controlled airspace. We have asked for the safety regulator to approve our RPL PPL community to fly outside controlled airspace with one passenger in an aircraft with an MTOW of up to 600 kilograms, which is exactly mirroring what has been approved for this self-administration, and for that to be allowed. And yet we are being denied that facility. And Senators, I have to really make the statement, and that is, we are being denied our rights and we are being denied our choice. And as a consequence of this provision not being afforded to our community, we are in effect being forced to then go into the private self-administration arena as pilots because we have nowhere else to go. And I come back to the statement I made earlier, and that is we seem to have a large and growing population of elderly pilots who are finding it harder to maintain their medicals. And what we know is many of these pilots get to a point that as soon as CASA starts asking for repetitive tests that are expensive, they simply sell the Cessna, they sell the Piper, they sell the Mooney, they sell the Beechcraft, they get out of CASA-regulated aviation and they simply go pay a fee to a private company and continue to do what they were otherwise doing within the CASA-regulated general aviation space.
You said that they could, sorry, Mr. White, you said that they can do it with the same planes.
It can be exactly the same plane, but it has a different registration.
Yeah.
And I think that the critical issue here is to understand that the self-certified world, the ASAO group of RAAus have been granted a special exemption to fly in Australian airspace with a numbered registration. So they have 19 dash series of numbered aeroplanes. They have 24 dash and a series of numbered aeroplanes. Whereas the rest of the community, the parachute group that were on earlier, the Warbirds, we all fly VH. And VH is the same insignia as your Qantas jets, everybody. So, but everybody who flies VH as a registration mark has to conform to the CASA system. And it was interesting to hear the difficulty to explain your question earlier from the last group, who just seemed to stumble over the concept that a VH aeroplane, as a minimum, you have to have a Class 2 or a Class 2 basic, which was the latest advent of medical by CASA, which is Transport Department related, or you go on to the higher classes for commercial activities where you need a Class 1 and then you need a commercial medical ATPL, higher up, higher up, higher up.
Right. Sorry, Mr. White, because I know the chair's going to pull my nose in a minute. Can I just finish on this one then? Thank you. So we go back to Mr. Morgan. You were saying you've got examples of older pilots because there's extra blood tests, blah, blah, so it come to a cost of about $5,000, which they've just decided, that's it, I'll sell that plane, get out, I'll shoot across and join RAAus. And then what's the average
Senator,
cost for a...
I have one particular example which I fall back on all the time because it really typifies and highlights the lunacy of the situation. And that is, I have a member of our organisation that about 2 years ago received a letter from CASA basically saying that he was a risk to aviation safety and therefore his Class 2 medical had been declined. He then went through the processes of appealing that. I provide an extensive amount of background support to help move that process forward. But at the moment he received the letter, I actually said to him, I'd like you to go straight out right now and register with the RAAus and go sign a self-cert medical and go conduct some training in an aircraft so that we can get you flying. So he did exactly that. And for the 2 years it took to get his medical renewed, he continued to fly an RAAus aircraft every week.
And you can provide the Senate with that information?
Absolutely, Senator. I think he'd be more than happy to come here and actually speak with you.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Thank you, Chair. I'll give someone else a chance.
Senator Brockton.
So just to continue on the theme, particularly the like for like. I mean, that's Mr. Morgan. That's essentially what you're calling for. Is if you've got similar sized aircraft flying similar places with a similar number of passengers, you're seeking similar set of rules in terms of medical certification.
Yeah. Well, Senator, again, I repeat the statement. Our association and I believe our AGAA partners do not understand why we have a regulator that seems intent on creating one set of rules for government CASA regulated participants and a completely different set of rules for private self-administration participants. And what we can see within the context of the medical reform process is we can see regulations that have been implemented which are clearly designed to disadvantage general aviation CASA regulated pilots. And what do I mean by that? If you have a look at what the United States has done over the past 2 years and we look at what the United Kingdom have done over the past 2 years, they have successfully reformed their private pilot medical standards. Both countries recognised there was a need for wholesale change, a total liberalisation of the system and move towards private driver's licence standards. We in Australia had hoped that this is exactly what CASA would do because there was a clear demonstration that a private driver's licence standard was sufficient for the 10,000 members of the RAAus and the thousands of members within the gliding fraternity. And so in 2016, late 2016, when the reforms were announced, we all sat back thinking, well, if the UK's done it, the US has done it, we're certainly not going to be different because let's face it, the air is not different here in Australia. It's exactly the same as it is in the United States and it is in the UK. Yet much to our surprise, the reforms that CASA delivered for us in general aviation was they implemented a basic Class 2 environment that now required pilots to pass a commercial truck driver's medical. But more importantly, they made that medical a requirement you had to pass it unconditionally. Now, it's the unconditional part that really creates the herring in this particular situation, in that there are substantially a great number of general aviation pilots that will pass a commercial truck driver's medical. In fact, many of my AOPA members have truck driver's licences. But they've consequently gone and looked at the standards to which they now need to pass under this basic, and they simply will not be able to pass it. Yet, these same people can go to the RAAus, fill out a self-cert form, and pay a fee to a private company and have access to aviation. So we feel there's a real problem with this. We feel that there's a system that's been delivered is designed to protect the self-administration by not allowing a total liberalisation, and we've seen by way of the self-administration submission on medical reforms that they are deeply concerned that if CASA had reformed the system to a private driver's licence self-certification standard, that the financial implications may well have rendered the organisation as unviable, and so we cannot answer. Sorry?
Which organisation?
The RAAus. And so it appears that we have a standard that's been introduced that's out of step with our international peers, does not reflect the risk that's been accepted by both the self-administrations, being the RAAus and also the gliding fraternity. So there is a problem here, Senators.
Okay, just a couple more from me. So you've been on this mission since 2016. So I suspect you have a pretty good idea. We don't have the ability to bring you back immediately after CASA to hear your response. So Tell me what you think they're going to tell us and tell us why they're incorrect.
Well, I imagine CASA will put forward that they've based their decisions on the assessment of risk. And if the Civil Aviation Safety Authority is adhering to its regulatory philosophy, then those risks will have generated a safety case and they'll be using that to base their decisions. Yet, interestingly, Senators, we've been requesting this safety case or this risk assessment so that we can have it peer reviewed, and it has not been forthcoming. We have not seen any documentation published by the Civil Aviation Safety Authority in this country that justifies the decision it made. However, the United Kingdom undertook a 10-year study into medical incapacitation in pilots. And that 10-year study resulted in a determination that the risk of incapacitation was so low that it was impossible to calculate. And it was one of the fundamental underlying supports for the reform of the UK system, was the fact that they had come to the clear realisation via a medical study that the risk was low. Now, if there's been a risk assessment or a study completed in Australia, we would love to see it. Our association would love to review it.
You've written to CASA, sorry.
Yes, I have.
Could you provide us with copies
More
of
than
those
happy to,
letters too,
Senator.
and particularly the dates and any responses?
More than happy to.
Again, without taking the Senator's time, you know, this is where you're going to fall into a trap when CASA come along. You're telling us that you've got an apple here and an apple here, identical aircraft, identical pilot, identical circumstances that they're flying in. These are under one licensing regime and these are under another. Completely opposite whilst being completely identical. Is that, so as I don't misunderstand it, that's what you're telling
For
us?
total clarity, Senator, we are asking for the apples to be made identical.
That's right.